John Gizzi, who joins us from Newsmax, Washington. John, it's good to see you replete in your fedora and ready to answer questions. This news...
Fire away, JD.
Happy to do it. And the FBI, metaphorically speaking, pulled the trigger yesterday on this alleged ISIS sympathizer. When this news broke, what was the reaction around Washington?
Well, once again, it was a case of it can happen here, coming on the tails of what happened in Paris 1 week ago. There is a growing nervousness in the nation's capital about will there be a shooting or a bombing here, and frankly, apprehending terrorists ahead of time, as was the case with the shoe bomber before he created a disaster in Detroit a few years ago. There's a collective sigh of relief. And let me say that while there is security, there's also lucidity here. We are learning about this and in the process feeling a bit more secure because our government is at least sharing the information, carrying on a policy that began with President Bush and his Homeland Security Secretary, Tom Ridge.
And John, as you were talking, we were showing an image of 20-year-old Christopher Lee Cornell. He's the man that FBI arrested and is accused of that attack in D.C. So without going into detail, there are now even more security, or there now more security enhancements that have been put in place since those Paris attacks?
Well, one would think so. Obviously, the Department of Homeland Security does not tip its hand, nor does the FBI, nor does the Secret Service here until after the fact. You know, so many of the things that could have become 9/11 Part 2 in the previous decade, we knew about only after the plot had been foiled. I imagine that's the case now, and I imagine when it comes to the security procedures, it's a matter of that's for our law enforcement officials to know and the terrorists to find out.
You mentioned the Secret Service. Obviously,
yes,
the Secret Service not so secret anymore, at least in terms of more personnel changes or a shakeup. The report that 4 senior officials have been reassigned in this reorganization after several high-profile breaches, including that man who scaled the fence and made it on into the White House, as well as the convicted felon who was on that same elevator with the president during the president's trip to the CDC in Atlanta. With all that going on, was this shakeup expected?
Yes, it was. I recall when the Secret Service director resigned after the incidents you mentioned, JD, and the panel was created to reform the Secret Service, everyone expected that it would get a complete airbrushing, cleaning, and fumigating, and that's essentially what has happened right now. And of course, the way is paved for a director who does not come from the ranks but is an outsider, something I predicted on this program some weeks ago.
John, the topic of morale at the agency came up this morning on Morning Joe. We want you to listen and get your reaction.
How big a shock to the system of the Secret Service was that?
Well, I mean, it was absolutely humiliating. I mean, even the fairly defensive Secret Service leadership had to admit that this was the lowest they had ever fallen. I interviewed some former senior officials who said they literally couldn't turn on the television. They were so demoralized.
So, John, is it the lowest they've ever fallen?
No. Certainly when the agency was being put together in the 30s during the era of bank robberies across state lines and the Depression, causing fears that the country would break apart to a degree not seen since the Civil War. That's when the Secret Service really had some problems, and at that point they did turn to an outsider, Frank Wilson, who was a former Internal Revenue agent. He formed the structure that is the modern Secret Service. And in fact, and JD will love this, his exploits were the subject of a movie featuring the late Glenn Ford.
Well, motion picture history aside, we have our own sad history when it comes to
Yes.
to a failure to protect. And you mentioned the formation of the agency. I would think that in the wake of what transpired November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, to John F. Kennedy, was there not a corresponding shakeup in Secret Service personnel after that horrible event?
Not to the degree that there was in the 30s and not to the degree today. And remember something, when the Secret Service had directors in the 60s, again, they came from the ranks of the service. One other thing to think about, JD, when the special panel was formed late last year to look into reforms of the Secret Service, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest told us that it would have its report completed by December 14th. Well, nearly a month has passed since December 14th. They're way beyond deadline. So I would imagine more reforms are coming, more major changes. That's a report to be watched very carefully.
We will watch that. We should also note that for his part, President Obama has said publicly he has complete faith in the men and women of the Secret Service, but that's a message that's come out of the Oval Office where now it appears that actions, decisive actions, have been taken to achieve that change. John Gizzi, from Newsmax, Washington, as always, sir, we appreciate your time and your insights and, of course, that trademark fedora. It's great to have you, sir.
I won't come on the air without it, JD.
Great.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be looking for you next time. Keep that hat in place, and America's Forum continues right after this update.